everybody. Just hang on one second. Doing some quick updating here really fast. Just want to make sure there's nothing crazy going on locally. Had these showers that just kind of fired up at the last minute today, and they're showing up pretty well on the radar. So a great good evening to everybody. I got the 4 Brady Bunch boxes up tonight as we are looking ahead to some busy weather over the next 5 or 6 days. We've got a system coming for Friday night into Saturday night and Sunday, or early Sunday. This is one of the problems we're having forecast-wise, by the way, is the not the fact that we are going to get some rain and wind in the mid-Atlantic and on up into New England. It's the timing, because the European and the NAM kind of want to rush it in Friday night and have it gone by Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and actually have a better day coming up for Sunday. Then you've got the GFS and the GFS pretty much in its own world, much slower, much slower, and it would basically wipe out both weekend days. And then there's a system right behind that. So it's very complicated what's going on. We've got moisture coming in with Hurricane Willa, which is moving in on the Pacific. Actually, I've been told today that the actual pronunciation should be Willa, I think, because of the L's being silent. But by this time tomorrow, it's going to be gone. So I'm not going to get too wrapped up into that. It is some of that moisture feed you can see on the satellite next to me is already streaming up into the Gulf states, and actually a lot of that tropical moisture is going to get pulled up very quickly. So by this time tomorrow, much of the rain in Mexico, except in some of the mountains, will be done. And of course, now we're going to be firing up this Gulf low. First things first is what's going on tonight in the Northeast of all places. I'm really kind of shocked the extent of the showers. Not so much in terms of the volume, but in terms of the strength. We actually fired up some severe thunderstorms this afternoon in southeastern New England. There was a tornado warning up for parts of northeastern Rhode Island, and in fact I was looking at the radar when that happened, and you could definitely see rotation and a hook echo on the radar. So it was pretty impressive. And this is where the Storm Prediction Center, they had a marginal risk today for that small quarter in southeastern New England with a general area of showers. And seeing on the radar tonight another band going through to my east that is firing up as it heads further east. And in fact, I'll give you the tight radar view here from my perspective, centered on Upton. And you can see the shower band. There's actually some lightning strikes showing up in parts of Long Island Sound. They may actually clip the North Fork as they move to the east. But the showers out to the west are just about done. There are just a couple of sprinkles left, and that's it. So we're going to be looking ahead to what's going to happen over the next several days, as I said, and going through the weekend. It's a very complex scenario that's evolved, and this is due to the fact that you have a couple of troughs coming down, and how they interact with each other. It has gotten even more complex as we have drawn closer. But let's start off with the wide radar view. I think that'll be fair, and we can take a look at the action that's going on in the Northeast and the bands here. This is all, by the way, going to lead to to somebody getting some snow tonight into Thursday. We're going to talk about that as well. But you can see these bands moving east, and some heavy downpours and thunderstorms in eastern Massachusetts and eastern New Hampshire. Low pressure is developing there, and it's going to strengthen a little bit as it moves to the northeast. And as the cold air comes in on the backside, areas up in northern New England are going to see their first snowfalls, first accumulating snowfalls. There's also some action going on as we're beginning to set up the boundary in the southern states. And you can see on the radar across northern Florida and the Panhandle, back right along the Gulf Coast, we are looking at a fairly steady and wide area of rain that goes all the way back into southwestern Louisiana and into southeast Texas. And we're seeing some tropical moisture from the area of clouds where we have Hurricane Willa embedded, and some of that moisture is now moving into South Texas and heading, actually that's more like southwest Texas really, or south central Texas, and that is heading to the northeast, and there's going to be some flooding issues with that. The hurricane is about to make landfall, and here's the tight satellite loop. Those islands that you see out here, that's the I checked them out on Google. So that's the Isla Maria Magdalena and the Isla Maria Madre, those two islands, and we saw the hurricane pass very, very close to those islands on the loop. The eye looks like it just passed to the westernmost island a little while ago, and the eye is still pretty pretty visible here on the satellite loop. It's not completely clear near the center, but it's still well defined enough. And now about to go inland. It's 70 miles south of Mazatlan in Mexico, and heading on up toward the northeast. So it's all this moisture that's going to get wrung out in the mountains with mudslides and torrential rains, but a lot of that is also going to get to the other side and get involved with the Gulf system that is going to be developing. Let's come back. Before we get to that, I want to go back to the northeast, because we do have some watches and warnings that are up, and in fact also I want to address, let me see where I have it hidden. Oh, it's back there. Okay. But we do have also some flood watches. There's not a whole lot from the standpoint of watches and warnings on the map tonight. There's just two small areas that we have going on with flood watches that are posted up in south central Texas. And then we also have the winter weather advisories, and the first winter storm warnings of the Northeast are up. And we're going to take a look at that. One of the Caribou, Maine's website, Weather Service website, if you're a snow lover, that is really one of the better local National Weather Service office websites. They've got so much stuff out there. Here is the breakdown in terms of the watches and warnings. I got a little bit of a tight shot here of the state of Maine. So the southern counties, of course, are out of it, but you go into central and northern Maine from west to east, and you've got winter weather advisories, and sandwiched in between, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 counties that are in a winter storm warning. So here's the forecast snow accumulation from this low from the Weather Service. And Bangor forecasting to get less than an inch. Lincoln, Maine, less than an inch. And then you start to get to Greenville, 7 inches. It's right in this band from Holton, Maine to Greenville that we're looking probably at a 4 to 8 inch snowfall. And then you start to drop the amounts a bit as you go further north to Presque Isle and to Caribou, where we're seeing snow amounts on the order of 4 inches at Presque Isle, 3 inches at Caribou, and then the amounts tail off to less than an inch in the far northern part of the state. It's the first one. Congratulations to the state of Maine and to northern New Hampshire as well, which is going to wind up getting a little bit of snow out of this. So check out Caribou's website. Go to weather.gov and just click on, click in northern Maine, and you can bring up their website. They got a lot of snow stuff up there, a lot of snow data up there that I wish the other offices had. So that's our those are our friends in Maine, and now we can start taking a look at what's going to be happening for us. And the scenario remains complex. Here's the surface map tonight from the GFS, the new GFS, and one of the issues that we're trying to resolve is the speed of which this system evolves in the east, because the GFS is the slowest of the bunch, so it really impacts the forecast for late Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Sunday in particular, because you can certainly make the argument that Sunday may wind up being a dry day, at least for my neck of the woods, as the low pulls up into New England. Now, this is also not coming out the way the models had days ago when it was showing a very wrapped up storm. Okay, But you're still going to wind up with gales and coastal flooding and some heavy rain out of it. Even though the surface low is much weaker, we are seeing a rather tight pressure gradient that's going to develop from the mid-Atlantic states northeastward through southern New England. You're going to have a big high sitting up just northeast of northern Maine, and you're going to have low pressure down to just off the Delmarva Peninsula, and those two things are going to combine to produce a very tight pressure gradient. Now here's the situation for tonight. I'm going to start wide, and then I'm going to come in tighter, but you can also see, by the way, Willa going inland, and all that moisture just gets translated into Texas by Wednesday afternoon, and even up into North Texas and parts of the Oklahoma Panhandle and a little bit of further north than that. Some of that moisture gets up into Colorado and Nebraska. The surface low that develops, this is a non-tropical low that is developing just off the northern part of the Texas Gulf Coast, and then it just rides along the Gulf states, and you've got high pressure up to the north in Canada that's starting to build in. Meanwhile, I'll run back, and you can also see this low for tonight that's developing here in the Gulf of Maine, running toward Nova Scotia, and it just kind of sits there during the day tomorrow. So this is where you get that snow up in northern New Hampshire, even into northern Vermont, a little bit of snow there on the tail end, but it's really central and northern Maine that get into this, and then the low pulls away to the northeast with the snows spreading through New Brunswick and beyond. And I'll take a look at, we're going to take also a look tonight at southeastern Canada, and we're also going to look at Europe and Asia, and in case I forget, please remind me to do the snow cover maps later on. But let's get close up now on, we'll do the surface first, and then we'll come back and we'll do the upper air. Now let me just make sure you guys are all with me, and you are, so that's a good thing. So let's get back to the map, and we'll show you how the late afternoon GFS is playing this and what the forecast dilemma is. So first off, you can see the low in the Gulf of Maine kind of churning away there. Big high builds down from Michigan. Cold air comes in tomorrow and Thursday into the northeast and mid-Atlantic states. And here comes your Gulf low. At first high kind of weakens a bit, but then a new one builds in Friday night and Saturday and gets right up in there into northern Maine. So now you've got a low that is sitting just to the east of Elizabeth City in North Carolina, approaching the Virginia border, a 999 low, and you've got a high, a 1030, or it could probably be even a little stronger than that in northern Maine. So you can see how many isobars, how tight the isobars are from southern New England down into the Virginia coast and into Chesapeake Bay. So we are talking about a pretty sharp and tight pressure gradient here. Now that low, and this is where we run into issues. That high is not going anywhere. It is just sitting there, and as a result, the low has a tough time, the rain has a tough time moving northward, and this could be one of the reasons why the model of GFS at least seems to be so slow in bringing the rain up. It's probably implying that drier air from New England is settling southward and is trying to fight it, but eventually the low does win out. It just takes forever to move northward. This is Sunday afternoon. Now at this point, the low is past its peak intensity, the high is finally moving out, and the surface low is actually weakening. But you'll notice there's another diver coming down into the Great Lakes and into Ohio that's going to weaken, and a new low is going to develop along the South Carolina, North Carolina coast Monday night, and then move up the coast and intensify. So there could be another round of rain here Monday night into early Tuesday. All the models show some variation of this, but it's the GFS that seems to be a bit more aggressive. So, and then of course it winds up in the Gulf of Maine. There's not a whole lot of cold air at this point, and that's why you're seeing rain pretty much all the way up until the very end, and you start to see a little bit of snow show up Tuesday night in parts of upstate New York, and maybe in you know, it's possible you'll probably see it even into northwestern New England eventually. So, by the way, also all the models have some kind of system here out east, well east of the Bahamas, spinning westward. Eventually it gets absorbed by the developing low to the north, but they do all seem to spin this up. So let's resolve this. Let's look at the upper air and try to figure out what's going on. And at least from the world of the GFS. So here's your trough that's coming through tonight. It's fairly deep. It is a pretty decent shot of cold air that it's dragging southward. That low actually cuts off in the Gulf of Maine, and it sits there. This is Wednesday night, Thursday, and it's still taking its sweet time getting out of the way. So that has impact on the follow-up system, which you can see now is moved in with that closed little circle there, or looks like a figure 8, in southeastern Nebraska. Okay, that is the shortwave trough that is going to be bringing that low up the east coast. Now, what we've gone from runs days ago, where it was basically taking that trough and just making it one sharp, deep trough, lifting it up along the east coast. It's not doing that anymore. If you look north and west of there, up in North Dakota, there's separate energy in that stream. And that is actually acting to kick this along, or at least trying to, but it never really gets that sort of sharp look to it. It's got a broadness to it, and this is keeping the system from intensifying. And now, as we move into Sunday, you've got much more of a powerhouse system that is diving down into the Dakotas. That really kind of acts as that sort of, the teeter-totter. One on one side lifts up the other. So it's just that the GFS takes forever to do this. And then the second system just dives in. And this one, actually, the second one looks a little more impressive, at least from the upper air, than the first one does, as it lifts on through here during Monday night, Tuesday into Tuesday night. And this is why it makes a second low. So if you watch this, we'll run the gears again. So there's the first one. Here's the second one, which is for the weekend. And again, the problem is that it's slower, and it just kind of waits for this system coming down in the northern plains to really lift it up and out. And then the northern plains system, because there's plenty of room, decides to do something on its own. It's kind of unusual to see it back to back like this. It's happened before, but it doesn't happen too often. Usually they don't, there's not enough room in the upper atmosphere. And by the way, if you look, there's actually another system behind that one. So we seem to be getting into a very active pattern going into the last week of October and the first days of the month of November. The Europeans' view on this is different. And by the way, I just want to show you the GFS's wind. Even though it does not have a strong surface low really, but it's that pressure gradient. The area that you see all outlined in red, if you look at the chart on the side, those are winds of 40, sustained winds, not gusts, but sustained winds of 40 knots or higher offshore, off the Delmarva Peninsula, the Jersey coast, Long Island, into southeastern New England. So it gets pretty windy here along the coast, and even some gales. If you look carefully, the green area, which is 20 to 30 knots, does get a little bit of ways inland along coastal New Jersey and certainly over Long Island. In fact, central and eastern Long Island get into that 40 knot plus wind. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some gusts of 50 out of this. The rainfall amounts are probably going to be on the order of 1 to 2 inches. I think there'll be some locally higher amounts. I'll be curious to see how much of that, the influence of the moisture from Willa gets involved, because the Mexican mountains might squeeze a lot of that moisture out. Some of it will, but I think it's fair to say that there's going to be 1 to 2 inches of rain out of this, especially if we wind up with some kind of long duration event. But the European is different in that the European is so much faster with all of this, and even though we can't see the precip maps here, but I can tell you because I looked at them off screen. So there's your surface low actually in central Alabama, and here's where the European has it Saturday morning. The European has the surface low just off the coast of southern Delaware. I mean, the GFS had it near much further south. This is Saturday morning on the European. This is Saturday morning on the GFS. So it's a good 100 miles further south than the GFS. It's almost 120 miles further south, and that makes a huge difference in terms of timing. Plus the fact that the European also seems to get rid of that high a lot faster, so that by Sunday morning your surface low is up into southeastern New England. And we're beginning to get ready to see the next system. You can see the closed isobar there around Chicago. That's the next surface low for Sunday and Monday. The European is less developed with this and faster. It still winds up with a low out in the ocean, a 998 low by Tuesday morning, but it's much further out and much faster. And then it deepens it as it moves it up into northern Maine. And the reason why is when you look at the 500s on the European, it's different. The one thing is that the GFS, this is for Friday morning. Here's the GFS at Friday morning. And you'll notice the GFS has this upstream system up in North Dakota, South Dakota. The European and the NAM don't really have that. If it has it, it's so much weaker. So it's really that whole southern trough. And then, of course, the next thing, that next powerhouse dives in faster on the European and lifts it up and then pivots it around for Monday into Tuesday. The GFS takes longer for that to come out, so it's got an extra day on it, basically, and it's much further to the left. So it has a much more a tucked-in low for the second system. But you can see how the upper air is so complex with regards to this. A lot of this is being driven by that whole, the blocky pattern that we have out in the Atlantic. And I think this is probably a good time to get into that a little bit. So let's watch what happens. So we talked about that blocking high developing over the north of the Azores. Part of it goes out, then the ridge rebuilds up toward Greenland. So there's your upper low that's sitting in southeastern Canada that keeps things dry through Friday. It's a very delicate balance when you've got these pieces, because if you have too much of that upper low, it'll squash the system behind it. So it has to stay, especially when you get into the wintertime and you're looking for snow to rain and that and questions about that. It's a delicate balance. The upper low has to stay in position long enough to hold the cold air in, but it has to give way just enough to allow the next system to come on in. And in this instance, the GFS does cause it to give way. And you can also see here, if you look up near Lake Winnipeg, just north of North Dakota, there's that second powerhouse system that dives down, rotates around, and again, this is the European, I'm sorry. So here it is on the European. So it dives down, rotates around, lifts up the first system, then brings up the second one, and then that goes out. By the way, going out to day 10, I want you to notice that you have some blocking that develops over northeastern Canada. There's some high latitude blocking here that forms, which is very interesting to see. The jet stream is suppressed well to the south of normal across the Pacific and across the United States and out in the Atlantic. So this is a pretty amplified pattern here going into the beginning of November. I think what it'll mean is cold fronts coming through with shots of cold air behind it. That is going to continue as we get into the month of November, of course, and I would suspect that these cold shots are going to become more impressive with time. So don't be too surprised if, assuming that this pattern holds. The GFS is sort of showing the same thing. Of course, the models have their own ideas on this longer term, but shorter term, again, the GFS holds on to that upper low in eastern Canada perhaps a little longer than the European, which probably accounts for the fact that that first system for Saturday takes longer to come up. It eventually does, but notice the second one on the GFS dives much further west than where the European has it. It dives it in down into Minnesota and Iowa. So this is Sunday morning on the GFS. This is Sunday morning on the European. it's not that far out. We're only, we're out at day 5 here, but there's a big difference. The GFS wants to have it deeper and further west, and this is why there's much more room. Look at where the trough axis is on Monday night into Tuesday morning. It's right along 80 and about to go lift negative as it moves, as it progresses east, and it lifts up into eastern Canada. Whereas the European does the same thing, but does it further to the east. So that is a model problem that we're going to have to figure out. And in the longer range, we do have more troughs swinging through the east. There was one run of the GFS yesterday that tried to make a big ridge in the east in the longer term, and it doesn't seem to be doing that on this run. It kind of keeps it on the flat side. It still has somewhat of a Canadian connection to it going into the longer term. Starting to see troughs dropping into the west coast, but we're not seeing like a huge ridge building up into the east. So I think it's an evolutionary pattern. Not sure how both models are going to deal with this. One of the things we want to keep an eye out for: watch the Pacific side. Let's see if we get a ridge to try to build into the Gulf of Alaska, because if you're a snow lover and a cold weather lover in the east, that's one thing you don't want to see, because that'll make a trough in the west. And let's see if the upper low that parked itself near the eastern side of the Aleutians comes back and digs a trough down along 160 toward Hawaii, because if that happens, that will likely eventually push the ridge back up into the western part of the United States, or into northwestern Canada at least, and not have a ridge out in the Gulf of Alaska. So these are all going to be very important keys as far as the longer term is concerned. I want to touch a little bit upon in Europe, because we talked about the possibility of this big building high that is building north of the Azores, is setting up a cold northerly flow into England and Ireland. And in fact, we do see some snow here this weekend up in Scotland, at least, not a whole lot. But we're also seeing that cold air get penetrating far south into Spain and France, and the mountains are going to be getting hit with a sizable amount of snow here over the next 5 to 6 days, as low pressure develops there over Switzerland and makes its way northward. I'm still not used to seeing some of the funny movements that some of these storms do when we look at it, when we look at the European map. And in the longer range, the models seem to have some kind of a strong storm heading for Portugal and Spain. I think it's the non-tropical variety moving to the southeast. But I bring this up more so that we can look at the snow cover here, because we are getting in toward the end of that period where we watch for the snow cover growth. There's some people look at the calendar month of October, and some people look at, I think it's weeks 40, 41, 42, 43, and 44. So if that's the case, I believe week 44 takes us to November 2nd or 3rd. So it gives you a couple of extra days. But if you look at it this way, either way, if you look at it to take it at least through November 3rd, it takes us almost to the end of this forecast period. And this is the most significant snow-covered growth, snowfall, rather, I should say, forecast snowfall. I'm looking more in the east, up in the over toward the upper right, that where the snow cover growth in Siberia and in Eurasia has been virtually non-existent for the first part of the month. It looks like we're going to be playing some catch-up here over the next 10 days, and that might bring up that the Siberian snow cover growth this year, which was running tepid at best, and actually it's probably fairer to say pretty low. But here's the 10-day snowfall over Europe and Eastern Europe and most of Asia, and it looks like that we're going to be getting a significant amount of snow as far south as 45 degrees north. So this is all going to, pretty much stay on the ground, we think, and it comes in toward the latter part of the forecast period. So it should have some staying power. I'll be curious to see how this all plays out with regards to the snow cover growth for the month of October and where we wind up finishing. In North America, on the GFS, still very robust snow cover growth, except for that small area that you see in southwestern Canada. That's the upper ridge. So you got the axis of the upper ridge is where you see no snow falling over the next 10 days. In fact, because of where the ridge is in the west, we're looking at some ample snowfall more into eastern Canada, and as well as in northwest Canada and up until to Alaska, which has also seen its snowfall rather lacking. In Canada, in southeastern Canada, and in Labrador, it does, these amounts are fairly significant. They're not in inches, by the way. They're in centimeters, so just bear that in mind. When you look at these Canadian maps and in the European maps, the numbers are not in inches for those maps. But nonetheless, significant snow amounts of 30 to 60 centimeters being forecast for much of Labrador. Also, western parts of Newfoundland get their first snows. Nova Scotia seeing some of their first snows. And you can also see the significant snows over the next 10 days being indicated for Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. I'm thinking with this system over the weekend and the one for Tuesday, I don't know how much cold air there's going to be around. And to tell you the truth, from the standpoint of forecasting, the first one is always the toughest one. I'm kind of craving to see more information. And being that it's only Tuesday, I've got some time here. From what I'm looking at, though, for areas, say, in the mountains of West Virginia and Western Virginia, I'm not really overly concerned. I know sometimes you can get some crazy snowfalls in those areas, depending on the setup, particularly if you have an upper low in play. I'm not so sure that we have it here. And, of course, as we look at the surface map with this first weather system for Sunday, moving some rains into Nova Scotia, you can see that the model does have what looks like ice and some snow over parts of Maine. That's all going to depend on low-level cold air, of course. And it looks like a wet scenario for Nova Scotia and Newfoundland into southeastern Canada. And now here comes the second low. This is for Tuesday, assuming that the GFS is right on this, because it's going to really depend on, is it right with that second system diving down much further west than the European? That's the big question. And that low, if the GFS is correct, and actually the European also has a fairly deep low up in northern Maine, so they kind of wind up in the same spot. They just get there in different ways. But that brings significant snows up into Labrador. And then late in the period, that's just when you start to see the snows being generated for parts of Newfoundland. And then there's that low running up to the northeast toward Greenland, and on it goes. It's going to be an interesting this is a fun time for me, to tell you the truth. I really enjoy looking at the weather pattern evolving during the months of October and November. I wait for that moment where the pattern just basically flips, and we lock into something that lasts for 5 or 6 weeks. We saw that happen last year toward the middle part of November, which led to the icebox of December and the first half of January, and then we got the second flip after that. By the way, WPC, in terms of rainfall amounts, I always think that this map is pretty useful to take a look at rainfall for the next 7 days. So across Virginia and into eastern West Virginia, we're looking at 7-day rainfall amounts of 1 to maybe 2.5 inches. And then along the coastal areas, because of that coastal low, you're looking at rainfall amounts, again, on the order of 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 2.5, 3 inches in some places, and some rather bullish amounts in coastal Maine. Some of this area, by the way, has been pretty dry, according to some of the Maine folks that I speak to on my Patreon page and my Patreon platform, and they'll be welcoming that. And in the Pacific Northwest, getting a little busy with rainfall too, with several inches or more coming in over the next 10 days. So pretty interesting setup going forward here. Going to be very curious to see which model winds up handling this better. My own gut kind of tells me when I look at the European model, and it's not that I want to gravitate to the European sort of reflexively, but it does look like it makes a bit more sense to me. But a lot of that's going to depend on the validity of that upstream shortwave trough as it comes down. That first weaker one that the GFS has, and the Canadian has it to a lesser extent, and the European, it's hard to find at all, and the NAM, it's hard to find at all. You know, it kind of, I guess I'm sort of gravitating to the smoother look in the upper atmosphere. So you're going to be paying very close attention to the satellites, the satellite loops over the next couple of days up in Canada to see how, if we could pick out these shortwave troughs and get a good grip on which models got the better handle on this. You know, personally, I guess I wouldn't mind if it came in a little bit faster, just to get it out of the way faster. But I would caution those of you who are in the mid-Atlantic states and on up into southern New England. The one caveat with the faster movement, and it's an important one, is the impact of coastal flooding. We have a full moon tomorrow night. The peak tides are on Friday, so if we wind up seeing gales Friday night into Saturday, then one of those high tide cycles, the tide is going to be high enough to cause probably some moderate coastal flooding. If it holds off like the GFS, we'll miss one of those higher tide cycles and go to the tide cycles later on Saturday where the moon impact, the full moon impact, will be less, and therefore perhaps the tidal flooding will be minor to occasionally moderate. One of the things that's happened over the last couple of years, and this is, you know, certainly a result of Sandy, Rior, and Irene to some extent as well, kind of reorganizing the coastline and reorienting the coastline, that we have been seeing coastal flooding occur at times where we normally wouldn't have seen it. There's also been some shoring up that's been done by state and federal officials, and they've shored up some of the coastlines to bring the flooding levels to be higher in order to cause flooding. New York Harbor has been able to raise it an extra foot or a foot and a half in some places. So that's a big deal. That would cut down on coastal flooding in some of the bigger storms. So, and Hoboken, for example, is doing a whole series of projects right now to basically reorganize their infrastructure so that they're not so that they won't get some of the flooding that they've been getting with these high tides over the last couple of years. And I think what you're going to see, by the way, is a lot of that going on nationwide. They're doing that now in Texas, in Houston. It's not tidal, but because of the heavy rains from Harvey, the reality is, and Ellicott City, Maryland knows this well, the reality is that when they've built some of the infrastructure that they build, it changes the natural draining that occurs, and the infrastructure kind of changes it. And if you don't account for that, then you're going to wind up having more events of catastrophic flooding. It may not necessarily be the frequency of it, but more a function of that the infrastructure can't handle it because it wasn't built to handle it. So there's going to be a lot of rearranging to do in order to avoid that. And of course, you're going to have the reconstruction going on in Florida from Hurricane Michael, and I guarantee you that you know, a lot of those homes that came down are going to be are probably homes that were put up when the building code perhaps was a bit more lax. You know, the building codes in Florida have been tightened up considerably, and the newer constructions will probably be much better. I actually did see a really good piece on CNBC a few days ago. I don't know if you got to see the shot of Mexico Beach. There was an obvious shot of all this damage. You know, buildings that were just kind of ripped apart like matchsticks. And there was one very large home that looked like it was completely untouched. And they talked to the owner of that home, and he had it constructed, and he explained how it really only it cost him an additional 15 to 20%, but it was built to withstand basically 250 mile an hour winds. And the damage to that home was absolutely minimal. And again, it may raise the cost, but there is a lot of cost saving that occurs down the road. Those houses are extremely energy efficient, so you save on electricity. The insurance for those homes actually is lower, so you save on insurance as well. So there are big pluses. There are big pluses and long-term savings. And one of the things that people don't take into account, by the way, when it comes to the destruction of hurricanes, is that there is a loss of money that you calculate from the standpoint of the loss of your own personal time. You're going to have to spend your time rebuilding your home, and that can take many months. And we are still 6 years after Sandy. There are still folks that are trying to get their homes rebuilt in this area on Long Island and in parts of South Queens by the ocean and on the Jersey Shore. There's cost involved. There's a calculated cost of time involved, your time, that is lost through all of this. So it makes sense to build homes. It may wind up costing a bit more, but in the long run, if it's a home that you know is not going to be able to be taken down by a Category 5 hurricane, that's a good thing. And by the way, he made one very important point. The home may be able to withstand a Category 4 or a Category 5 hurricane, but that is not an excuse for you to stay in it when the hurricane comes. He made that very, very clear, and I totally agree with that. You get out. And I think the lessons are going to be learned every year, because every year you're always going to have people that don't get out, and you're always going to have the people that are going to complain if they do evacuate and they don't get the tragedy that they were hoping for. And I got a limited amount, if almost no patience for stuff like that. And hopefully more people will know the lesson of all of this. So we're on to the chat board tonight. I've been yapping away. Before we get we'll get to what your comments and thoughts. Let me just do my little quick shameless self-promotion here. So I'll bring it up. For those of you, a lot of you have been very generous and supported my channel. I really, really appreciate it. I've set up a platform on Patreon. It is a subscription platform. It's $2 a month. You get exclusive posts just for Patreon members, plus my website posts. There's an app so that you can have Patreon on your phone, and you can pull all this down so that you could have a good experience on your mobile device with it. There are videos that I do in the morning, most mornings at 9:30, exclusive for Patreon members. We do it through YouTube, but they're not listed, so you have to be a Patreon member to see it. And you guys get 2 videos. Plus, I alert you to the fact that there's a YouTube video coming on at night as well. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I do just for Patreon members. So do consider it if you like. I think you'll have a lot of fun. There's no flat earthers on there. There's no geoengineering people. There's no HARP people. It's just you folks that are on my channel and take weather seriously and enjoy it. So the Patreon link is up there on the chat board for those of you who are interested. And if you're watching on the replay, by the way, you can the links do pop up every once in a while, and you can open them up and check it out. Thank you very much for considering it. So Gary Vestas is going to hit Mega Millions first, and I be his personal meteorologist. Thank you, Garo Vestas. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I didn't even play, to tell you the truth. I don't know. It's such a losing proposition to play something that's 250 million to 1. I think, what is it? You get a better chance of getting hit by lightning 4 times. Ryan Ford. I hope you're paying attention, Ryan, to all this weather stuff going on, and watching how these models evolve, because this is a good place for you to learn. If the current pattern holds into early or middle November, do you think the chances of snow along the I-95 corridor go up? Well, look, during the first part of November, I think it's a real shot in the dark to get snow up I-95. I think you got to stand a better chance maybe toward the last 10 days of the month of November. So we're going to have to see this pattern a month from. This pattern a month of now, I think would have been far more bullish. We'd be sitting here right now trying to figure out snow amounts for areas in northern New Jersey and southern New England, and maybe even along the coast, debating about when the changeover to rain would occur. So if this were the last 10 days of November, we'd be in a different ball game, but it's not. It's the last 10 days of October. But let's see where it goes. Interesting upper air that we looked at earlier, suggests that we're going to be continuing to evolve in our pattern. And as I said, November is a very important month to look at with regards to the upper air pattern, because you start to get clues over which way the winter is going to go. Scott Briller pointing out that Caribou's earliest snowfall is September 29th. I don't know if they've had their first flakes up that way. I haven't been paying attention. Lorenzo Rodriguez, you've got rain for tomorrow if you're in Central and East Texas. That is correct, with the remnants of Willa coming through, but they should come through relatively quickly and then get out of there. They're not going to last forever. Will Orlando, Florida stay on the southern edge of the rain shield or no, says Thomas Saul. Well, at least initially, yes. But as that low moves across the Florida panhandle, you are going to see a trailing front that's going to drop down to Florida. So eventually, I think you're going to see some showers further to the south. But you've got a little bit of time to buy. Strong thunderstorm, Axis 2084. Welcome. Like seeing new people on the chat board. Thanks for being here. We had a strong thunderstorm with hail this afternoon in New Hampshire. And yes, it was hail out of the thunderstorm and not sleet. Absolutely correct. One of my pet peeves, when people in the wintertime, when we have ice pellets and they say, oh, it's hailing out. And I just want to go, no! No, it's sleet! I'm just getting on here. Vincent Urso, which coast will have the storms in Florida, the east or the west? Well, at least right now, it's more in the northwestern part of the state. And when we take a look at what's going to happen with this Gulf low as it moves across, you're probably going to see that rain come in. Not so much tomorrow. There might be a few scattered cells on the east coast and not in the west. But when we get toward Friday, Thursday night, Friday, that's when you're going to have the low go by with the trailing cold front, and you'll probably have some showers, scattered showers and thunderstorms, possibly on both coasts. So I'm not looking for too much here. Northern Florida getting it more so because you're in that frontal boundary at the moment that actually thins out as the next big high builds down, because that cold, dry push actually makes it pretty far to the south. And then you're going to get into that rain back again on Friday, on Thursday night, Friday, as that low moves across southern Louisiana and the Florida Panhandle. So it doesn't really look all that bad for Central and South Florida, at least. Other than that, with when the front comes through along about Friday. Okay, Anthony Orr, by the way, put up some interesting stats early. I'm scrolling all the way back here now about the fact that Hurricane Kenna in the Pacific in 2002 became a Category 5 on October 24th. So that is the latest as far as a Category 5, a storm becoming a Category 5 in the Pacific. Willa and Patricia became Category 5 hurricanes on October 22nd in the eastern Pacific. And if you remember, Patricia holds the record for the most intense hurricane observed with sustained winds of 205 miles an hour. I forgot what the lowest pressure got down to, but they were carrying sustained of 205. I don't know if you'll ever see that again. Okay, so by the way, for those of you who were on last night, yes, I have I have the right shoes on. Okay, I had mismatched my shoes, my black shoes with my black sneakers, and I took one of each. You actually couldn't really tell because, well, they were both black, unless you really looked and stared at them for a while. I showed it to somebody, and it took them a little while before they figured it out. Okay, so running down through here, I'm just quickly scanning through your comments. which are always welcome, by the way, and appreciated very much. Wayne S., I put that link up to Google, YouTube. It's interesting about the maps and why they now use a globe. Wayne, give me some context. I might have skipped your prior comments, so if you're still on, can you just elaborate on that? I'm a little confused. Unless we're talking about the flat earthers. Okay. Let's see. Ryan, I did answer your question. The pressure, the fact that the pressure is higher on that coastal system it still doesn't take away from the gradient. Okay, so we got David Schwartz, James NASCAR fan, Dio Dan Kumar, T-Bear, Delvin, Greenfire, Johnny Quest, Thomas Saul, Big Hellos, and Mirtha Gunter, and Matthew Waxman. And Gary Rivard, who I haven't seen. He's ready to build a snowman. Good to see you here. Patricia Jackson. Okay, so running down a little lower here. Joe Nurek, finally live. So this is early for Maine to get hit. Yeah, I don't know. I have to go back and look. It seems in my memory that there have been instances where there have been some heavier snows a little bit earlier in the month of October. So perhaps it's about average. But I got to go back and look. I don't want to speak too soon on that. Scott Briller put up that Caribou, the earliest snow was September 29, so that would be, 25 days ago, if you want to, in terms of where we are in the calendar now. I really have to go do a little checking on that as far as when the mean first snowfall date is in Maine. And of course, Maine is a big state, so it's going to make a difference between the area down near the coast and the area inland. Models starting to strong, backing off, and at the last minute, boom, they turn it into a bomb again. I don't think so, Timothy, because the models at 500, the 500 millibar level in the upper air, they've kind of been they've been trending away from that. The European in particular, which earlier this week I think had the strongest low of all the bunches, the one that's come in that has backed off considerably. Iron Mind 10, you're being productive, you're watching me, and you're working out at the same time. Timothy Veltman, you might get some snow up your way when this is all said and done. Wouldn't be surprised, Iron Mind, if they would wind up seeing some gust of 40 or 50 miles an hour from this. It wouldn't shock me. Paul Giavella, crazy day in southern New England. I know 2 confirmed tornadoes, funnel clouds, water spouts, same storm system giving northern New England their first snowstorm. The atmosphere is telling you that there's a lot of energy in there. And that trough that is swinging through the eastern part of the United States right now is very impressive and very deep. And that is going to be the catalyst for the first snowfall up in Maine. James Hines had their first he has had your first snowfall in parts of Nova Scotia the other day, 0.7 of a centimeter. Okay, and that's 1 centimeter is, 1 inch is 2.5 centimeters. So yeah, you kind of had a little bit more than a coating, but it was there. It's snow cover and it counts. Do I think there'll be a high wind watch for coastal New Jersey? You know what? I don't like to guess on. Like, I can sort of figure out the winter storm watches, winter storm warnings, and winter weather advisories if they're going to put those up. I'm not so good with the wind advisories and the high wind watches. That's, for some reason, it's a little more subjective. They have their criteria. I guess a wind advisory would probably go up for the areas right along the immediate coast. I don't know if they'll go the route of the high wind watch. Although if you look at the way the models are generating some 40 to 50 knot sustained winds along the immediate coast and over central and eastern Long Island, perhaps in those areas, yes. I think there might be some snow for some of the northern Catskills and the higher elevations out of this, Gara. Wouldn't at all surprise me. Okay, so coming to the end of this. Will this winter, ask Shannon Culbreth, welcome aboard. Will this winter give the Southeast any chance of winter weather this year, and how much of a chance? Okay, Shannon, if you're new, I just want to tell you, and everybody that's here a while already knows this, I'm not very long-range forecasting is not my thing. I have tried to get my head around it. It's so incredibly technical. There's so much to look at, and it involves not just looking at here, but the entire globe. I just can't get my head around it. I really don't have an opinion with regards to what the winter weather is going to be in the east, other than to say that I pay attention to what goes on during the month of November and the first part of December to get some clues as far as the winter is going to be. The El Nino being weak and more central and west based statistically would give you perhaps some chances. It tends to favor below normal temperatures more as you go south rather than as you go north. So that might increase your chances of seeing it. You certainly saw it last year with that really cold pattern that we had. But that's really the best I can do as an answer. I know I really kind of walked around the question here, but it's hard for me. I'm just not a long range guy. Joseph Gallo, thanks so much always for providing opportunity to interact as a community of weather nerds. Yes, would love to set up something at a local library in Rockland County and New City. All right, Joseph, go right ahead. You can have them get in touch with me. I'm easy to find. I'm on Facebook, and I've got my websites, and my email address is floating around in there somewhere. But just message me on Facebook. Have the library get in touch with me, and if I could work it out into my schedule, sure, I'd love to come up. So let them get a hold of me. Thank you very much. And if any of you, by the way, if you're in the New York City, Long Island, I do a lot of library talks on Long Island. My next one on Long Island is in Babylon on December the 12th. New Jersey, I did my first one last week at the Springfield Library in Springfield, New Jersey, and I think I might have another one coming up very soon, as soon as I get the logistics tied up, and it may be in 2 weeks. So as soon as I know, I'll let you know about that. But if you want me to come out to your local library, let me, let the library know, and let them get in touch with me. And I've done them on the weekends too. So I'm not against getting in my car and driving up someplace and enjoying my weekend in a different environment. Donald James. Where else possibly in New Jersey? Well, I'll let you know as soon as I know. I don't want to say it ahead of time, but I'll let you know. Hopefully tomorrow I can tell you. Alan Malone, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. All right, I guess I can tell you. I might be in Bayonne, okay? I don't know why I was thinking I needed to keep it a big secret. It might be in Bayonne on Wednesday, November 7th, okay? But it's not scheduled yet, so we'll have. I'm trying to tie up some of the loose ends. 5,000 subscribers with no videos, which I think is a great name for an ID. What do I think of the first week of November? Well, a lot depends. Are we going to be, the models, trying to have some blocking across northern Canada, which would have the jet further to the south and move cold fronts along with shots of cold air going through? I don't see it getting terribly warm, and I don't also see it getting terribly cold. I think we're just going to be in sort of a volatile up and down phase going into the first part of November, which is actually a change from last year, certainly, when we had the big upper high right through the first week and sat in a ridge position. Do the teleconnections give clues to whether or not this pattern will hold into November? If so, can you pull them up? You know what? I'm running out of time, Ryan, for tonight, but I can answer your question by saying you're only going to see the teleconnections kind of go out to 16 days, so they're really not going to give you much beyond the 2 weeks. And they also change every day depending on how the models change and which model run. They're done off the 0Z run, but I can tell you that the teleconnections that you'd calculate off the 12Z run would be different from the ones at the 0Z run. Didn't have time to pull them up, but maybe we'll do them tomorrow, okay? I promise. Do you see high winds, Johnny Quest, along with that rain? I don't know that you're going to get much wind up your way. I don't know your climate area that well, though. You do have that easterly flow, and you get a little upslope. Sometimes I guess that does cause the wind to kick up. But I'm thinking, just give me a second, Johnny. Let me just check here. You know, how tight was the gradient? It doesn't look like the gradient by you was overly tight. The really tight part of the gradient is in easternmost Virginia over Chesapeake Bay, the Delmarva Peninsula, New Jersey, Long Island to southern New England. I mean, it might get a tad breezy, but I don't see it getting really that windy out by you. Wellington Lopez, do we have any showers on Long Island right now? I think they're just pretty much done from what I saw on the radar earlier. Okay, Ryan, I'll try and get them up for the Joe and Joe Weather Show, which is coming up at 9:15 on Facebook. So, it is raining in. I'm sorry, Wellington. You told me you were in New Jersey. There are one last batch of little showers going by on the radar in New Jersey. I thought you were, I had my mind focused on Long Island, which is where I'm at, although I'm not there right now. Okay, so let's wrap it up here, folks. We're an hour into this. Really good live stream tonight. I enjoyed it very, very much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Again, please consider the Patreon platform as a, it's $2 a month, and it's a great way to stay in touch with weather. And by the way, you can, you don't have to wait for the live streams to chat with me. If you're on the Patreon platform, you can chat with me at any time, and I do respond in a timely fashion, which I surprise myself at how timely I've been trying to respond, because with all the different social media platforms, it takes up so much of your day. But I'm putting the Patreon platform front and center for everybody. And by the way, and with Christmas, not that far off, and Hanukkah, and all the other gift-buying holidays that are ahead of us, I do have a link on Amazon that, if this doesn't cost you anything, but if you shop on Amazon, here's a link to it, and basically you get your stuff like you normally would. You pay the prices that you normally would pay, but if you access it through the what I call the Joe Stradamus link, which I'm putting up now. I can't write and talk at the same time, but here's the Amazon link. So if you shop on Amazon and you go through this link and just use the search box through this link, you get your stuff, and Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin, and I get to buy myself a sandwich every once in a while, pick up a few cigars, a cup of coffee. It's a great, easy way to support what I'm doing, and I'm very grateful to you, by the way, and to my audience, for those of you who have. And again, those options are up there for you. All right, folks, have a great evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Patreon members, you getting your live stream tomorrow morning at the usual time, which has been about 9:30 a.m. Eastern time.